Pull up a chair, this is Revenge Kitchen, and tonight we're slow roasting justice.
The rain drummed against the hospital windows like bullets on a tin roof, each drop a reminder that some storms never pass. I stood in the sterile hallway, still wearing my work clothes from the construction site, concrete dust mixing with the antiseptic smell that seemed to cling to everything in this place. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that makes even healthy people look like corpses. "Mr. Reed," the doctor's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade. Dr. Martinez, according to his name tag, looked like he'd delivered this kind of news before, too many times. I turned toward him, my steel-toed boots squeaking against the polished floor. 25 years in the Army had taught me to read faces, and has told me everything I needed to know before he opened his mouth. "I'm sorry, we did everything we could." The words hit me like shrapnel. Sarah, my Sarah, gone. No, the thought hammered in my skull. This can't be happening, not again, not after Lisa. What happened? My voice sounded foreign to my ears, hollow and distant. Multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. She was brought in about 2 hours ago. The paramedics said they found her in the parking lot behind the forensics lab where she worked. The world tilted. Sarah Chen, my fiancée, my reason for believing that life could be good again after losing Lisa to cancer 3 years ago, was dead. The woman who'd convinced this old soldier that he deserved happiness, who'd planned our wedding for next spring, who'd left me a voicemail just this morning saying she loved me and couldn't wait to see me tonight. "Can I swallowed hard, can I see her?" Dr. Martinez nodded, his expression softening. "Of course, take all the time you need." The walk down that hallway felt like the longest patrol of my life. Each step echoed in the silence, each breath burned in my chest. When I pushed open the door to room 247, the sight of her small form under that white sheet nearly brought me to my knees. Sarah looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. Her black hair was still pulled back in the neat bun she always wore to work, and I could almost imagine her dark eyes opening, that brilliant smile spreading across her face as she teased me about being late again. I pulled the chair close to her bed and sat down, taking her cold hand in mine. The engagement ring I'd given her 2 months ago caught the light, a simple solitaire that had belonged to my grandmother. "I'm sorry, baby," I whispered. "I should have been there, should have protected you." But I'd been 200 miles away, finishing up a security consultation job in Philadelphia. She'd been working late again, staying behind to process evidence from a drug bust. Always so dedicated, my Sarah. Always wanting to make sure the bad guys didn't walk free on a technicality. The irony wasn't lost on me. She died trying to put criminals behind bars, and now some criminal had put her in the ground. A knock on the door interrupted my grief. 2 men in cheap suits stood in the doorway, badges hanging from their belts like trophies. "Mr. Reed, I'm Detective Michael Bennett. This is Detective Barnes. We need to ask you some questions about Dr. Chen." I studied them with the same intensity I'd once used to scan for insurgents. Bennett was older, maybe 55, with the kind of face that had seen too much and cared too little. Barnes looked nervous, kept glancing at his partner like he was waiting for cues. "What do you need to know?" I asked, not letting go of Sarah's hand. "Where were you between 6 and 8 p.m. today?" Bennett's tone was casual, but I'd heard that same false friendliness from interrogators before. "Philadelphia, working a job for Hartwell Security. I can give you contact information for my client." "That'd be helpful." He pulled out a notebook, scribbled something. "Dr. Chen ever mention any problems at work, anyone giving her trouble?" "No, she loved her job, said it felt good to help get justice for victims." Bennett exchanged a look with Barnes. "Thing is, Mr. Reed, this looks like it might be gang-related. Dr. Chen was working on evidence from a big drug bust last week. Could be someone wanted to make sure that evidence disappeared." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What kind of evidence?" "Cocaine, about 50 kilos worth. Street value around 2 million. Bennett closed his notebook. "We think someone connected to the Vega cartel might have wanted to send a message." The Vega cartel. I'd heard that name before, back during some of my darker assignments overseas. They were brutal, efficient, and they didn't leave witnesses. "We'll find who did this," Barnes said, speaking for the first time. He sounded like he actually meant it, unlike his partner. After they left, I sat alone with Sarah for another hour, holding her hand and trying to make sense of it all. My fiancée, killed by drug dealers. It felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in other cities, to people who didn't know how to protect themselves. But Sarah had been protecting herself. She'd taken my advice and gotten a concealed carry permit. She knew basic self-defense. She was careful, always aware of her surroundings. So how did they get close enough to shoot her? The question nagged at me as I finally left the hospital and drove home to our apartment. Sarah had moved in 6 months ago, and everywhere I looked I saw reminders of her. Her coffee mug in the sink, her reading glasses on the nightstand, the wedding dress hanging in the closet, still in its protective bag. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my recliner, staring at the wall of commendations and photos from my military service. 25 years of fighting other people's wars, and I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. My phone buzzed, text message from an unknown number. Sorry for your loss. Sarah was a good woman. She didn't deserve what happened. I stared at the screen. Who the hell was this? Who is this? The response came quickly, someone who knows the truth. Meet me tomorrow at Riverside Park bench by the oak tree. Come alone, 2 p.m. Every instinct I'd developed over 2.5 decades of military service screamed that this was a trap. But it was also the first lead I had, the first hint that maybe there was more to Sarah's death than a random cartel hit. I finished my bourbon and went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain that wouldn't stop, thinking about justice and revenge and the thin line between them. The next morning, I drove to the forensics lab where Sarah had worked. The parking lot was still cordoned off with yellow tape, and I could see the chalk outline where they'd found her body. The sight of it made my hands clench into fists. You Dan Reed. I turned to see a woman approaching, maybe 40, with tired eyes and the kind of posture that came from carrying too much weight on your shoulders. Elena Rodriguez, she said, extending her hand. I was Sarah's friend, her lawyer too, when she needed one. She mentioned you? I shook her hand, noting the firm grip. Sarah had always spoken highly of Elena, had called her one of the good ones in a profession full of sharks. I heard about the meeting you have today, Elena said, glancing around nervously. Sarah asked me to give you something if anything ever happened to her. My blood went cold. What do you mean, if anything happened to her? Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. She came to see me 3 days ago, said she'd discovered something at work, something that scared her. She asked me to hold on to this and give it to you if. I took the envelope with shaking hands. It was sealed, my name written across the front in Sarah's neat handwriting. What did she tell you? I asked. Not much, just that she'd found evidence that some of the drugs from recent busts weren't making it to the evidence room. That someone was skimming. The pieces started clicking together in my mind. And you think whoever was stealing the drugs killed her to keep quiet? I think Sarah was murdered because she was going to expose corruption in the police department, Elena said quietly. And I think you need to be very careful who you trust. I waited until I got home to open the envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a letter written in Sarah's handwriting. My dearest Dan, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. I discovered something at work that I can't ignore, but I'm scared of what might happen if I come forward. The flash drive contains copies of evidence logs that don't match what's actually in storage. Someone is stealing drugs from major busts and replacing them with lookalikes. I traced the pattern back 18 months. I think Detective Bennett is involved. Maybe others too. I was going to take this to the FBI, but I wanted to document everything first. If something happens to me, please don't let them get away with this. People deserve justice. I love you more than words can say. Be careful. Forever yours, Sarah. I stared at the letter for a long time, reading it over and over. Sarah had discovered that the cop investigating her murder was the same cop who'd killed her. The bastard had looked me in the eye and lied about gang involvement while he knew damn well he'd pulled the trigger himself. The flash drive contained exactly what Sarah had described: evidence logs, photos, chain of custody documents. Someone had been systematically stealing drugs and replacing them with baking soda or flour. The pattern went back even further than 18 months. I found discrepancies going back 3 years. At 1:30 p.m., I drove to Riverside Park. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained gray and threatening. I found the bench by the oak tree and sat down, my hand instinctively checking the .45 caliber Colt 1911 holstered under my jacket. A man approached at exactly 2 p.m., mid-30s, Latino, wearing a maintenance uniform from the city parks department. He sat down on the other end of the bench and pretended to eat a sandwich. "You Dan Reed?" he asked without looking at me. "Yeah." "Name's Carlos Vega. Dr. Chen was trying to help my sister." The name hit me like a punch. Vega, as in the cartel. He laughed bitterly. "That's what they want you to think. There is no Vega cartel, man. It's just a name Detective Bennett made up to blame his shit on. My sister Maria got caught up in his operation, and when she tried to get out, they killed her, made it look like a gang shooting." "How do you know all this?" "Because Maria told me before they killed her. Bennett and some other cops have been running drugs for years. They bust the small dealers, keep the product, and sell it back on the street through their own network. Anyone who gets too close to the truth ends up dead." Carlos reached into his lunch bag and pulled out another envelope. "Maria gave me this before she died. Evidence, photos, names. I was too scared to do anything with it, but when I heard about Dr. Chen, I knew I had to act." "Why didn't you go to the FBI, Internal Affairs?" "Because I don't know how high this goes. Could be the whole department, could be feds too. But you," he looked at me directly for the first time. "Dr. Chen said you were special forces, said you knew how to handle situations when the system fails." I took the envelope. "What are you asking me to do?" "What soldiers do," Carlos said simply. "Eliminate the threat." After Carlos left, I sat on that bench for another hour, processing everything. Sarah hadn't been killed by gang members or cartel hitmen. She'd been murdered by the cops who were supposed to protect her, the same cops who'd sworn to uphold justice. The system had failed. The people entrusted to serve and protect had become the predators. And now they were covering it up, probably planning to frame someone else for Sarah's murder while they continued their criminal enterprise. I thought about my options. I could take everything to the FBI, hope they weren't corrupt too, hope they'd actually investigate instead of just warning Bennett and his crew. I could hire lawyers, work through the system, trust in justice. But I'd trusted the system once before, when Lisa was dying and the VA kept denying her treatment claims. I'd filled out forms and made phone calls and waited for bureaucrats to decide whether my wife deserved to live. By the time they approved her treatment, it was too late. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. That evening, I called my old Army buddy, Jimmy Walsh. He'd left the service the same time I did and started a private investigation firm in D.C. "Jimmy, I need a favor. Background checks on some Baltimore cops. Deep dive off the books." "This about Sarah?" Jimmy's voice was careful. He'd known about the engagement, had been planning to be my best man. "Yeah, it's about Sarah." "Whatever you need, Dan, send me the names." While I waited for Jimmy's report, I began my own reconnaissance. I followed Detective Bennett for 3 days, learning his patterns, his routines, his habits. He lived alone in a suburban house worth way more than a cop's salary should afford, drove a Mercedes, ate at expensive restaurants. I watched him meet with known drug dealers in parking lots, passing envelopes back and forth. I photographed him entering a warehouse that was supposed to be abandoned, but showed signs of recent activity. I documented everything with the same methodical precision I'd once used to track insurgents in Afghanistan. Jimmy's report arrived on day 4. "Dan, your Detective Bennett is dirty as hell. House worth $800 K, cars worth another $150 K, but his official income is $85 K a year. Bank records show regular cash deposits going back 5 years. His partner tours is even worse, owns 3 properties and a boat. But here's the kicker. Both of them were investigated by Internal Affairs 2 years ago for evidence tampering. Case got buried after the lead investigator died in a car accident. Investigator's name was Lieutenant Patricia Moore. Her family says she'd been getting death threats. There's more. Found connections to at least 6 other cops, including some in narcotics and evidence control. This is bigger than just 2 dirty cops, Dan. This is an organized criminal enterprise using police badges as cover. Be careful, these guys have killed before." "Jimmy." That night, I sat in my apartment cleaning my weapons and planning. The Colt 1911 I'd carried for most of my military career. the tactical knife I'd been issued for my last deployment. The M24 sniper rifle I'd legally purchased after retirement, ostensibly for hunting. I wasn't hunting deer. The warehouse Bennett frequented was in an industrial area near the harbor, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings. Perfect for what I had in mind. I spent 2 days conducting surveillance, mapping entry and exit points, identifying security measures. On the third night, I watched through my rifle scope as Bennett arrived with Detective Barnes and 3 men I didn't recognize. They went inside, and through the windows, I could see them moving around what looked like a drug processing operation. Scales, cutting agents, packaging materials. This was where they processed the stolen evidence before selling it back on the street. I had my target, now I needed my plan. The next morning, I called Elena Rodriguez. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "I need you to send copies of Sarah's evidence to the FBI, the DEA, and every major news outlet in the city. But don't send them until I give you the word." "Dan, what are you planning?" "Justice," I said simply. "Sarah believed in justice, so do I." "This isn't justice, Dan. This is revenge." "Sometimes they're the same thing." I hung up before she could argue further. Elena was a good lawyer, a good person. She believed in the system because it had worked for her. But the system had failed Sarah, and it had failed me, and it had failed every victim of Bennett's operation. Sometimes when the system fails, you have to become the system. That night, I made my move. I approached the warehouse from the east, using the abandoned buildings for cover. The industrial area was deserted after dark, just like I'd hoped. 2 cars in the parking lot, Bennett's Mercedes and an unmarked police cruiser. The warehouse had 3 entrances, front door, side door, and a loading dock in the back. I'd seen them use the side door most often, and it offered the best tactical advantage. Single point of entry, good sight lines, limited escape routes. I positioned myself on the roof of the adjacent building, 40 yards away with a clear view of the side entrance. The M24 was loaded with .308 Winchester rounds, more than enough to punch through the warehouse's thin metal walls. At 11:47 p.m., Detective Bennett exited the building. Through my scope, I could see his face clearly, the same face that had looked at me in the hospital and lied about Sarah's death. The same man who'd killed my fiancée and then pretended to investigate her murder. I controlled my breathing the way I'd been trained. Slow inhale, natural pause, slow exhale. The crosshairs settled on center mass. "This is for Sarah." My finger began to squeeze the trigger. And then the side door opened again, and Detective Barnes stepped out. He was talking on a cell phone, walking directly into my line of fire. I eased off the trigger. Barnes might be corrupt, but I'd seen his face in the hospital. He'd looked genuinely sorry about Sarah's death. Maybe he was involved, maybe he wasn't, but I couldn't risk killing an innocent man. Bennett got in his car and drove away. I'd missed my chance. But as I packed up my rifle, I realized something. I'd been thinking about this all wrong. Killing Bennett would feel good, but it wouldn't solve anything. He'd just be replaced by another corrupt cop, and the operation would continue. I needed to destroy the entire network. The next day, I changed my plan. Instead of assassination, I would conduct a systematic campaign to expose and eliminate the corruption. I would use everything I'd learned in 25 years of military service, but I would use it strategically, methodically. I started with surveillance. I identified all the key players in Bennett's network: Detective Torres, Sergeant Mike Crawford, Evidence Tech Lisa Wung, and at least 4 others. I documented their meetings, their financial transactions, their criminal activities. Then I began psychological warfare. I sent anonymous packages to each of them, containing photos of their criminal activities and a simple message: "We know what you did. Confess or face the consequences." Within a week, the paranoia started. I watched through binoculars as they began checking over their shoulders, having hushed conversations, looking at each other with suspicion. Crawford started carrying a gun off-duty. Wung moved to a hotel. Torres hired a private security firm. Fear was eating them alive from the inside. But Bennett was smarter than the others. Instead of panicking, he began conducting counter-surveillance, trying to identify who was targeting his network. I had to be more careful, more creative. I decided to hit him where it would hurt most: his money. Using skills I'd learned in Army intelligence, I hacked into his offshore bank accounts and transferred his drug money to various legitimate charities. Cancer research, veterans organizations, victims' rights groups. By the time he discovered what had happened, over $2 million was gone. Then I moved on to tours. His boat mysteriously caught fire while docked at the marina. His rental properties suffered a series of unfortunate accidents, burst pipes, electrical fires, gas leaks. Nothing that would hurt innocent tenants, just expensive damage that would cost him everything. The psychological pressure was working. One by one, Bennett's network began to crack. Sergeant Crawford was the first to break. He walked into FBI headquarters and confessed everything, claiming he was being stalked by someone who knew about the drug operation. The feds were skeptical at first, but when Crawford produced evidence, they had to listen. Evidence Tech Wung was next. She fled the city entirely, but not before sending a detailed confession to the Baltimore Sun newspaper. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Police corruption scandal ROCKS Baltimore Department. By Friday, Internal Affairs had opened investigations into 12 officers. By the following Monday, the FBI had launched a federal task force. Detective Torres shot himself in his garage rather than face arrest. But Bennett was still free, still dangerous, and now he knew someone was systematically destroying his operation. I was in my apartment, planning my next move, when my front door exploded inward. Bennett stood in the doorway, gun drawn, his face twisted with rage. "You killed my partner," he snarled. "You destroyed everything I built." I raised my hands slowly, gauging the distance between us. 15 feet. Too far to rush him before he could fire, but close enough to make conversation. "Torres killed himself," I said calmly. "Guilt has a way of doing that to people." "Bullshit, you've been fucking with us for weeks. Anonymous tips, hacked accounts, mysterious accidents. Real clever, soldier boy, but you made one mistake." "What's that?" "You should have just killed me when you had the chance." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Now I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to disappear. New identity, new life, new operation somewhere else." I looked him in the eyes of the man who'd murdered Sarah, and felt a strange sense of peace. "You're right, I should have killed you, but I wanted you to suffer first. I wanted you to lose everything, the way you made me lose everything." "Well, congratulations, you got your revenge. Now you get to die for it." "Actually," I said, glancing at my watch, "I think you're the one who's going to die." Confusion flickered across his face. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You remember Alina Rodriguez, Sarah's lawyer friend. I told her to send everything to the FBI and the media if she didn't hear from me by 6 p.m. today. It's 6:15. Bennett's face went pale. "You're bluffing. FBI probably has your location already. They've been tracking your phone since you left your house. Should be here any minute." As if on cue, we heard the sound of sirens in the distance, getting closer. Bennett's gun hand wavered. "You set me up. I gave you a choice. You could have confessed, faced justice through the proper channels. Instead, you chose to come here and threaten me. That was your mistake." The sirens were louder now, maybe 2 blocks away. "You think you've won?" Bennett's voice was desperate now. "Even if they arrest me, even if I go to prison, Sarah is still dead. Nothing you do is going to bring her back." "You're right," I said quietly. "Sarah is dead, but now her killer is going to face justice. That's all I ever wanted." The sirens stopped outside my building. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, shouted commands. Bennett looked at the door, then back at me. For a moment, I thought he might try to shoot his way out. Instead, he lowered his gun and sat down heavily in my recliner. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Known what?" "That I didn't kill her." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "I didn't kill Dr. Chen. I mean, I would have eventually. She was getting too close, but someone beat me to it." The FBI agents chose that moment to burst through my door, automatic weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to get on the ground. In the chaos that followed, the arrests, the questions, the statements, Bennett's words echoed in my head. "Someone beat me to it." 3 days later, I sat in FBI agent Sandra Martinez's office, trying to process everything I'd learned. Bennett had been arrested and charged with racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy, but not with Sarah's murder. "Detective Barnes confessed to killing Dr. Chen," Agent Martinez explained. Apparently, he'd been skimming money from Bennett's operation to pay for his daughter's cancer treatment. When Dr. Chen discovered the evidence discrepancies, Barnes panicked and shot her. I stared at the FBI agent, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Barnes, but he seemed genuinely sorry about her death? Yeah, that's because he was. Guy's been falling apart since it happened. Says he never meant to kill anyone, that he just wanted to scare her into keeping quiet. And Bennett, going away for a long time, probably life with all the charges we're filing. The drug operation is finished, and we've identified at least 15 other victims of the corruption ring. I should have felt satisfied. Justice had been served. The corrupt cops were going to prison. Sarah's real killer would face trial. But I felt empty inside. All that planning, all that careful revenge against Bennett, and I'd been targeting the wrong man. Barnes had been right there in the hospital room with us, expressing sympathy for my loss, while knowing he was the one who'd pulled the trigger. "There's something else," Agent Martinez said. "Barnes wants to see you, says he has something to tell you about Dr. Chen's last moments." The Federal Detention Center was a sterile, depressing place that smelled like disinfectant and despair. They brought Barnes to a small interview room, and I was shocked by how much he'd changed. The nervous detective I'd met in the hospital had been replaced by a broken man with hollow eyes and trembling hands. "Mr. Reed," he said quietly as he sat down across from me, I'm so sorry for what I did." I studied his face, looking for deception, for manipulation. All I saw was genuine remorse and self-loathing. "Why?" I asked simply. "My daughter, Emma, she's 8 years old, has leukemia. The insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatment she needed, and I didn't have the money, when Bennett offered me a cut of the drug money." "So you decided to steal from evidence?" "Just enough for Emma's treatment. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back somehow. But then Dr. Chen found the discrepancies." Barnes wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She confronted me in the parking lot that night, said she knew what I was doing, that she was going to report it. I begged her not to, told her about Emma, about the cancer. She said she was sorry about my daughter, but she couldn't let crimes go unpunished." "So you shot her?" "I pulled my gun to scare her, to make her listen, but she started to run, started screaming for help. I panicked. I fired 3 times. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "She said your name at the end, said to tell you she loved you." The words hit me like bullets. Sarah's last thoughts had been of me, even as she was dying because of some desperate cop's poor choices. "There's something else," Barnes continued. "Something I need you to know. When I searched her body for evidence, I found a voice recorder in her jacket pocket. She'd been recording our conversation." "What happened to the recording?" "I destroyed it, but not before I listened to it. She wasn't just trying to expose the corruption, Mr. Reed. She was trying to get me to confess, to work with her to bring down the whole operation. She said she knew I wasn't a bad person, that I was just a father trying to save his daughter." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed. Sarah had been trying to save Barnes, to give him a chance at redemption, even while he was threatening her. "She died because she believed people could be better than their worst moments," Barnes said, "and I proved her wrong." After leaving the detention center, I drove to Riverside Park and sat on the same bench where Carlos Vega had first told me about the corruption. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I thought about revenge and justice, about the difference between them and the price of both. I'd spent weeks planning elaborate revenge against Bennett, when the real killer had been hiding in plain sight, consumed by guilt and self-hatred. Barnes would go to prison for Sarah's murder. Bennett would go to prison for his crimes. The corruption ring was broken. Justice had been served after a fashion. But Sarah was still dead, and I was still alone. My phone buzzed. Text message from Alina Rodriguez, heard about the arrests. "How are you holding up?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Better than I expected. Thank you for everything." "What will you do now?" That was the question, wasn't it? What does a man do when his quest for revenge ends not with satisfaction, but with empty understanding?
Don't just watch. Be part of the crew. Like, subscribe, and keep the revenge stories coming to your doorstep.
I thought about Sarah's last words, her belief that people could be better than their worst moments. She died trying to save a corrupt cop's soul, believing in redemption even as he pointed a gun at her. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe true justice wasn't about punishment or revenge. Maybe it was about preventing the next tragedy, about building something better from the ashes of loss. I typed back something that would make Sarah proud. Over the following months, I used the money from Bennett's seized accounts, money the court awarded to victims of the corruption ring, to establish the Sarah Chen Foundation. We provide legal assistance to families dealing with police misconduct, fund cancer research, and offer support to children who have lost parents to violence. I also testified before Congress about police corruption, helping to draft new legislation requiring independent oversight of evidence handling. Sarah's death became the catalyst for reforms that would protect future victims. It wasn't the revenge I'd originally planned, but it was justice, the kind Sarah would have believed in. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream about that moment in the warehouse when I had Bennett in my crosshairs. In the dreams, I pull the trigger. I watch him fall. I feel that moment of savage satisfaction. But then I wake up and think about Sarah's voice recorder, about her trying to save the soul of the man who killed her. And I know that the path I chose, the harder path, the one that led to understanding instead of vengeance, was the right one. Sarah always said that justice wasn't about making the guilty suffer. It was about protecting the innocent and helping people be better than their worst impulses. She was right, as always. Detective Michael Bennett was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Detective James Barnes received 25 years for second-degree murder. The other members of the corruption ring received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. Emma Barnes, James's daughter, survived her cancer treatment. The experimental therapy worked, and she's now in full remission. I know because I helped pay for her follow-up care through the foundation. Some people might call that forgiveness. I call it justice, not for Barnes, but for an innocent 8-year-old girl who didn't choose to have a corrupt father. Sarah would have approved. 6 months after the trials ended, I scattered Sarah's ashes at Riverside Park, near the oak tree where Carlos Vega had first contacted me. Her father, retired Judge Thomas Chen, was there, along with Alina Rodriguez and a few of Sarah's colleagues from the forensics lab. She always believed that good people could overcome evil, Judge Chen said as we watched the ashes drift away on the wind. I think she would be proud of what you've accomplished in her name. I hoped he was right. I hoped that somewhere, somehow, Sarah knew that her death hadn't been meaningless, that it had led to justice, to reform, to saved lives. That night, I got a call from Jimmy Walsh. "Dan, you need to see the news." I turned on the television to see a breaking news report. Baltimore police corruption case sparks nationwide reform. The anchor was discussing how Sarah's case had become a catalyst for federal legislation requiring independent oversight of police evidence handling. Congress passed the Sarah Chen Act today, the reporter continued, requiring all police departments to implement independent auditing of evidence storage and chain of custody procedures. The legislation is expected to prevent future cases of evidence tampering and corruption. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had grown from our tragedy. Sarah's name would live on in legislation that would protect countless future victims. But there was one more chapter to this story that I hadn't expected. 2 weeks later, Alina Rodriguez called with news that changed everything. "Dan, you need to come to my office. There's something about Sarah's case that you need to know." When I arrived, Alina was sitting across from a woman I'd never seen before. Late 30s, professional attire, nervous energy. "Dan Reed, this is Detective Rachel Murphy from Internal Affairs. She's been investigating something connected to Sarah's murder." Detective Murphy leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, we've been reviewing old case files looking for other potential victims of the corruption ring. We found something disturbing." She opened a file folder and spread several photographs across the table. Crime scene photos from what looked like 3 different locations. These are 3 other forensic professionals who were murdered over the past 2 years. All of them were working on cases involving drug evidence. All of them died under suspicious circumstances that were blamed on gang violence. My blood ran cold. "You think they were killed by the corruption ring too?" "We think there was someone higher up the chain than Bennett. Someone who was ordering the hits on forensic professionals who got too close to the truth." She pulled out another photo, this one of a man in an expensive suit. Captain Mike Torres wasn't just Bennett's partner in the drug trafficking. He was the enforcer. We have evidence suggesting he personally killed at least 4 people, including Dr. Chen. I stared at the photo. But Torres is dead. He killed himself. That's what we thought, but the body found in his garage wasn't Torres. DNA came back as a homeless man named Robert Kelly. Someone staged Torres' death and gave him a clean escape. The room started spinning. You're saying Torres is still alive? Very much alive. And according to our intelligence, he's started a new operation in Miami. He's learned from the Baltimore mistakes, smaller scale, more careful, better security. Detective Murphy closed the file. We want to bring him in, but he's incredibly paranoid now. Won't meet with anyone he doesn't know personally. That's where you come in. What do you mean? Torres thinks you're dead. According to the story we leaked to the underworld, you were killed in a car accident 3 months ago. But we also let it slip that you had hidden evidence about the Baltimore operation, evidence that could still bring him down. Elena placed her hand on my arm. Dan, they want you to go undercover, to make contact with Torres and gather evidence of his new operation. I looked between the 2 women. You want me to hunt down the man who ordered Sarah's murder. We want you to help us bring him to justice, Detective Murphy corrected. The right way this time, through the legal system. I thought about it for a long moment. The quest for revenge I'd thought was over wasn't over at all. The man ultimately responsible for Sarah's death was still out there, still hurting people, still profiting from corruption and murder. But this time, I wouldn't be acting alone. This time, I'd be working within the system, helping legitimate law enforcement bring a killer to justice. What would I have to do? Detective Murphy smiled grimly. What you do best, Mr. Reed, hunt dangerous men. 3 months later, Miami. The humid Florida air clung to my skin as I sat in a beachside cafe, watching the man who'd ordered my fiancée's murder sip a mojito 30 feet away. Captain Mike Torres had gained weight and grown a beard, but I'd have recognized those cold eyes anywhere. He was going by the name Miguel Torrent now, posing as a wealthy businessman with interests in import-export. In reality, he was running the same kind of operation he'd run in Baltimore, just with better security and more sophisticated money laundering. The FBI had spent 2 months establishing my new identity, Daniel Stone, a disgraced former DEA agent looking to make money on the wrong side of the law. My cover story was that I had inside information about federal drug investigations that could be valuable to the right buyer. Torres had taken the bait. Stone, he said, approaching my table with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. You look like shit. Prison will do that to you, I replied, not looking up from my coffee. I'd spent hours practicing this persona, bitter, desperate, morally compromised. My associates tell me you have information I might find valuable. Depends on what it's worth to you. Torres sat down across from me, studying my face with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Before we talk business, I need to know I can trust you. The last operation I ran got burned by someone on the inside. Cost me everything. Baltimore, I said simply. His eyes narrowed. You know about Baltimore. I know Michael Bennett was an amateur who got sloppy. I know you had to clean up his mess by eliminating witnesses. And I know you were smart enough to disappear before the whole thing collapsed. Torres leaned back in his chair, reassessing me. What else do you know? I know that forensic pathologist you had Barnes kill wasn't the only loose end. There were others. A lieutenant named Patricia Moore who died in a convenient car accident. A federal prosecutor named David Kim who had a heart attack at 35. Very thorough cleanup. You've done your homework. I've done my time. 3 years in federal prison for taking money from drug dealers. You know what I learned in there? The system doesn't give a shit about justice. It's all about who has the most power and the best connections. Torres nodded approvingly. Finally, someone who understands how the world really works. Over the next hour, he laid out his new operation. Smaller scale than Baltimore, but more sophisticated. Instead of stealing evidence from police lockups, he was bribing federal customs agents to allow certain shipments through Miami's ports. The drugs would be processed in a legitimate-looking pharmaceutical facility, then distributed through a network of corrupt doctors and pharmacists. The beauty of it, Torres explained, is that everyone involved thinks they're just cutting corners on paperwork. Most of them don't even know they're part of a criminal enterprise. What about law enforcement? We have people in the DEA, FBI, and local police. Not partners like in Baltimore, just information sources. People who owe favors or need money. Much safer that way. I nodded, playing the part of an impressed criminal. But inside, I was recording every word, every detail, every name he mentioned. The wire I was wearing was state-of-the-art, undetectable even if he searched me. "So what information are you selling?" Torres asked. "Names and locations of Federal Drug Task Force operations for the next 6 months. Raids, wiretaps, undercover operations. Everything." His eyes lit up with greed. "How much?" "5 million, non-negotiable." "That's a lot of money for information." "It's a lot of information. Worth a lot more than 5 million if it keeps your operation running clean." Torres considered this. "I'll need to verify what you're selling before I pay." "Fair enough, but I'll need assurances that I won't end up like that pathologist in Baltimore. I know you have a reputation for eliminating problems permanently." "Dr. Chen wasn't my call," Torres said with a shrug. "Barnes panicked and killed her before I could arrange a cleaner solution. I prefer to avoid unnecessary violence. Bad for business." There it was, the admission that he'd been planning to kill Sarah, that her murder was part of his criminal enterprise. The FBI would have everything they needed for a conviction. "When do we make the exchange?" I asked. "Tomorrow night. There's a warehouse at the Port of Miami, Container Facility 7. Meet me there at midnight with the information, and I'll have your money." We shook hands, and Torres walked away, probably thinking he'd just made the deal of a lifetime. He had no idea he'd just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder while wearing a wire monitored by federal agents. That night, I called Detective Murphy from my hotel room. "We got him," I said. "Full confession to ordering Sarah's murder, plus details of his new operation and the corruption network. You'll have enough evidence to take down at least 20 people." "Outstanding work, Dan, but tomorrow night is going to be dangerous. Torres isn't stupid. He'll have security, probably armed. Are you sure you want to go through with the meeting?" I thought about Sarah, about the 3 other forensic professionals Torres had killed, about all the future victims his operation would claim if he wasn't stopped. "I'm sure, let's finish this." The next night, I drove to the Port of Miami with a briefcase full of fake documents and a team of FBI agents positioned around the warehouse. Torres was already there when I arrived, along with 4 armed men who looked like they knew how to use the weapons they carried. "Stone," Torres called out as I approached, "you bring what we discussed." I held up the briefcase. $5 million worth of federal secrets. You bring my money." He gestured to a duffel bag on a nearby shipping container. 5 million cash, just like we agreed. But something felt wrong. Torres was too relaxed, too confident. His men were positioned not just for security, but for ambush. "Before we make the exchange," Torres said, "I need to tell you something. I know who you really are, Daniel Reed." My blood turned to ice, but I kept my expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Former Army Special Forces, engaged to Dr. Sarah Chen before she was killed. You've been hunting the people responsible for her death." The trap was closing around me, but I had to play it out. "You're paranoid, Torres. I'm just a corrupt ex-cop looking to make money." Or maybe you're wearing a wire and working with the FBI to bring me down." He pulled out a gun and pointed it at my chest. "Let's find out." Before I could react, his men had surrounded me, weapons drawn. Torres approached and began searching me, his hands finding the recording device within seconds. "FBI wire," he announced, holding up the small transmitter. "Looks like I was right to be paranoid." This was not how the operation was supposed to go. The FBI team was positioned outside the warehouse, waiting for my signal. But Torres had turned the tables, and now I was trapped with no backup and no way to call for help. "The thing about revenge," Torres said conversationally, "is that it makes people predictable. I knew that sooner or later someone would come after me for Baltimore. I just had to wait and see who it would be." "So what now?" I asked, calculating distances and angles, looking for any chance to escape or fight back. "Now you die just like your fiancée should have died. Barnes was sloppy, emotional. I would have made it cleaner, more professional. Sarah died because she believed in justice. She was trying to save Barnes from himself. Sarah died because she was naive, Tors sneered. She thought she could reform a corrupt system by exposing a few bad cops. She never understood that the corruption goes all the way to the top. Maybe, but her death led to the Sarah Chen Act. Federal oversight of police evidence handling. Your Baltimore operation could never happen again. Tors laughed bitterly. You think one law is going to stop corruption? There's always another way, another angle. People like me don't disappear just because Congress passes a feel-good law. People like you disappear when people like me hunt them down. Except you failed, Reed. You found me, but you walked into my trap. Now you're going to join your girlfriend in whatever pathetic afterlife you believe in. Tors raised his gun, and I prepared to die. But at that moment the warehouse lights went out, plunging everything into darkness. In the chaos that followed, shouting voices, running footsteps, the crash of doors being kicked in, I threw myself behind a shipping container as gunfire erupted around me. FBI, drop your weapons! The voice echoed through the warehouse as tactical lights cut through the darkness. Tors and his men returned fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The FBI team had been monitoring the wire signal, and when it went dead, they'd moved in for a tactical rescue. The firefight lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, 2 of Tors' men were dead, 1 was wounded, and Tors himself was on the ground with a bullet in his shoulder, cursing in both English and Spanish. I emerged from behind the container to find Detective Murphy and a team of federal agents securing the scene. You okay, Dan? She asked. Better than okay, I said, looking down at Tors as paramedics worked on his wound. We got him. Tors looked up at me with pure hatred in his eyes. This doesn't end anything, Reed. There are a dozen more operations like mine. Cutting off one head doesn't kill the snake. Maybe not, I replied. But it sends a message. People who murder innocents in the name of profit will be hunted down and brought to justice. By who? You. You think you're some kind of avenging angel. I thought about Sarah, about her belief in redemption and second chances. About Barnes sitting in prison, paying for his crimes while his daughter recovered from cancer. About the Sarah Chen Act preventing future corruption. About all the lives that would be saved because Tors was finally going to face justice. No, I said quietly. I'm just a man who loved a good woman. A woman who believed that people could be better than their worst moments and that justice was worth fighting for. Tors was arrested and charged with murder, conspiracy, drug trafficking, and racketeering. The evidence we'd gathered led to the arrests of 23 other people involved in his Miami operation, including corrupt federal agents, customs officials, and pharmaceutical executives. But the victory felt hollow. Sarah was still dead. The other forensic professionals Tors had killed were still gone. Justice had been served, but the people who'd suffered because of his crimes would never get their lives back. 3 weeks after Tors' arrest, I was packing up my Miami hotel room when I got a call from Elena Rodriguez. Dan, there's someone here who wants to meet you. Who? Emma Barnes, Detective Barnes' daughter. I drove back to Baltimore that afternoon. Emma was waiting in Elena's office with her father's sister, a kind-looking woman named Patricia who'd been taking care of the girl since Barnes went to prison. Emma was small for 8, with her father's dark hair and serious eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. She was in remission from her leukemia, but still looked fragile, like she was made of glass that might shatter if handled roughly. Mr. Reed, she said quietly when Elena introduced us, I wanted to thank you. For what, sweetheart? For helping my daddy tell the truth. Aunt Patricia says he feels better now that he's not keeping secrets anymore. I knelt down to her level, struck by her maturity. Your daddy made some mistakes, Emma, but he's a good man who was trying to help you get better. I know, he visits me every month and he's different now. Sadder, but cleaner, you know, like he washed off something dirty. The simple wisdom of her words hit me harder than any philosophical treatise on justice and redemption. James Barnes had found peace in confession, in facing the consequences of his actions. His daughter could see the difference. There's something else, Emma continued, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a hand-drawn picture, a stick figure man and woman holding hands under a rainbow. This is you and Dr. Chen, she explained. Daddy told me she was a good person who wanted to help people. He said she would have wanted you to be happy. I stared at the drawing, my eyes burning with unshed tears. An 8-year-old girl battling cancer, whose father had killed my fiancée, was trying to comfort me. "Thank you, Emma. This is the most beautiful gift anyone's ever given me." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. "Daddy says Dr. Chen is watching over all of us now, making sure the bad people get caught and the good people stay safe." Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, looking at Emma's drawing and thinking about everything that had happened over the past year. The quest for revenge that had become a search for justice. The corruption that had been exposed and stopped. The lives that had been saved because Sarah had refused to look the other way. I thought about Torres, sitting in a federal prison cell, finally paying for his crimes. About Barnes, serving his sentence but finding peace in confession. About Emma, alive and healthy because her father's desperate love had led him down a dark path, but also because the foundation established in Sarah's name was now helping pay for her continued treatment. Justice wasn't clean or simple. It wasn't about good people wearing white hats and bad people wearing black hats. It was about flawed human beings making choices, facing consequences, and sometimes finding redemption in the midst of tragedy. Sarah had understood that. She died trying to save the soul of a corrupt cop, believing that people could be better than their worst moments. Maybe she'd been right all along. The next morning, I got a call that would change everything again. "Mr. Reed, this is Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We'd like to offer you a position as a consultant. There are other cases like Baltimore and Miami, other Torres-type operations around the country. We could use someone with your skills and experience." I thought about it for a moment. A chance to hunt down more corrupt officials, to prevent more tragedies like Sarah's death, to build on the legacy she'd left behind. What would the job involve? Going undercover to infiltrate corruption networks. Working with local law enforcement to identify and prosecute criminal enterprises using government positions as cover. Dangerous work, but important work. And I'd be working within the system, everything legal and legitimate. Absolutely, you'd be a federal consultant working directly with FBI task forces. Everything by the book. By the book, the way Sarah would have wanted it. "I'll take the job," I said. 6 months later, I was in Chicago working undercover to expose a network of corrupt judges who were taking bribes to fix criminal cases. The operation was similar to Baltimore and Miami in its scope, but different in its methods. These weren't cops stealing drugs or customs agents taking payoffs. These were the people at the very top of the justice system, selling verdicts to the highest bidder. The investigation would take another 8 months to complete, but when it was finished, 14 judges and dozens of lawyers would be behind bars. More importantly, hundreds of criminal cases would be reviewed and overturned, ensuring that victims got real justice instead of purchased acquittals. It was the kind of work Sarah would have been proud of, the kind of justice she'd believed in. I still missed her every day, still woke up sometimes expecting to see her sleeping beside me, still reached for the phone to call her when something interesting happened. The grief never fully went away, but it had transformed from a burning need for revenge into a quiet determination to honor her memory. Emma Barnes sent me a new drawing every month, usually pictures of superheroes or cartoon characters, but sometimes more serious artwork that showed she was still processing everything that had happened. Her latest drawing showed a woman in a white coat standing next to a man in a suit, both of them smiling. At the bottom, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Dr. Chen and Mr. Reed fighting bad guys together." Maybe she was right. Maybe Sarah was still with me in some way, still fighting for justice, still believing that people could be better than their worst moments. The work was dangerous, and there would always be more corruption to expose, more criminals to hunt down. But for the first time since Sarah's death, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Fighting the good fight, seeking justice instead of revenge, making sure that Sarah Chen's legacy lived on in every corrupt official brought to justice, every victim whose case was solved, every family that got the truth they deserved. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I first sat on that hospital chair, holding Sarah's cold hand and swearing vengeance. But it was the ending she would have written if she'd been the one telling this story. Justice, redemption, hope. The way it should be. 2 years later, I stood in the Baltimore courthouse, watching as the last member of Tor's original corruption ring was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. It had taken nearly 3 years, but every person involved in Sarah's murder and the drug trafficking operation was finally behind bars. Elena Rodriguez found me in the hallway afterward. "How does it feel?" she asked, "finally having closure?" I thought about the question as we walked out of the courthouse together. "It doesn't feel like closure," I said finally. "It feels like a beginning." "A beginning of what?" "Understanding, maybe." Sarah always said that justice wasn't about punishment, it was about prevention, making sure the same tragedies don't happen to other people. We paused on the courthouse steps. Across the street, I could see the forensics lab where Sarah had worked, where she discovered the evidence that led to her death. "The Sarah Chen Foundation has helped over 200 families in the past 2 years," Elena said. "Provided legal assistance, funded medical treatment, supported victims of police corruption. She would be proud of what you've built." "We've built," I corrected. "None of this would have been possible without people like you, people who believe in doing the right thing even when it's difficult." My phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Walsh. Another case, another corruption network to investigate. This one involved Border Patrol agents taking bribes from human traffickers. More victims, more families destroyed by people who'd sworn to protect and serve. "You have to go," Elena said, reading my expression. "Yeah, there's always another case." "Do you ever think about stopping, about finding some peace?" I considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I think about Sarah, about what she died trying to do. She wanted to make the world a little bit safer, a little bit more just. As long as there are people out there abusing their power to hurt innocent victims, I can't stop. Even if it means you never get to have a normal life, a family of your own." "This is my family," I said, gesturing toward the courthouse, toward the city where Sarah had lived and died. "Everyone who's been helped by the foundation, everyone who's gotten justice because of these investigations, everyone who's safer because corrupt officials are behind bars instead of on the street. That's my family." Elena smiled sadly. "She really did love you, you know, Sarah. She used to talk about your future together, about the children you'd have, the life you'd build." "I know, and maybe in another world, another timeline, that future exists. But in this world, this timeline, my job is to make sure other people get to have the futures that Sarah and I will never have." As I walked to my car, I thought about the drawing Emma Barnes had sent me that morning. This one showed a group of stick figures standing in front of what looked like a courthouse, all of them holding hands. At the bottom, she'd written, "The Justice Family." Maybe that's what we were. Elena, Agent Walsh, Detective Murphy, the FBI task force members, the honest cops and prosecutors and judges who still believed in doing the right thing. All of us connected by our commitment to justice, by our refusal to let corruption and violence go unpunished. Sarah's family, the family she'd created by dying for what she believed in. I started the car and headed toward the airport. Another city, another case, another chance to honor her memory by fighting for the justice she died trying to achieve. The radio was playing an old song, something about how love never dies, it just changes form. I thought about that as I drove through the streets of Baltimore, past the places where Sarah and I had planned our future together. Maybe that was true. Maybe love didn't die, it just became something else. In my case, it had become a mission, a purpose, a reason to keep fighting even when the fight seemed hopeless. Sarah Chen had died believing that people could be better than their worst moments, that justice was worth any sacrifice, that love was stronger than corruption and greed and violence. 3 years later, I finally understood she'd been right. Justice wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about love. Love for the victims who deserved truth. Love for the families who needed closure. Love for the society that depended on people being willing to stand up and fight for what was right. Sarah's love hadn't died with her. It had just changed form, becoming the foundation for everything that came after. The Justice Family, the Sarah Chen Foundation, the Sarah Chen Act, the dozens of corrupt officials behind bars, the hundreds of families who'd gotten help, the thousands of future victims who would be protected by the reforms we'd fought for. All of it built on love, all of it Sarah's legacy. All of it proof that some stories don't end with death, they begin with it.
What do you think? Did the main character go too far or just far enough? Drop your opinion in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.